The halberd was not supposed to be here. Not in this corner of the galaxy, where the stars seemed so distant they were little more than pinpricks of light in the dark void. Not in a space where even the most seasoned crews would hesitate to venture. But here it was, floating like a ghost, its metal hull battered and worn after years of neglect. The crew had picked up a faint signal, a distress beacon, barely a whisper, coming from an unknown source. What they found wasn't just a signal. It was an ancient ship, one that looked older than anything they had encountered in their time traveling across the stars. Dr. Eli Voss, the ship's linguist and xenoanthropologist, stood at the airlock with his heart racing. His fingers tightened around the handle of his gear bag. Behind him, the rest of the salvage crew exchanged uneasy glances. None of them knew what lay beyond the halberd's airlock, but Eli felt something pulling at him, something beyond simple curiosity. He had read about derelict ships, empty and abandoned, lost in the deep reaches of space. But none of those stories prepared him for this. The door opened with a soft hiss, releasing a cold metallic odor that hung in the air like a warning. Stepping inside, Eli could feel the weight of silence pressing in on him. The interior was dim, lit only by the soft glow of emergency lights, their faint pulses casting eerie shadows along the walls. The walls themselves were unlike anything he had ever seen. Carvings, strange symbols, and flowing script covered the surfaces, all in a language he couldn't begin to understand. It was as if the ship had been designed for a civilization that had never interacted with humans, a species that had evolved beyond what Eli could imagine. The crew moved cautiously, weapons at the ready, scanning the ship for any signs of life. But all they found were the remnants of an ancient culture, broken machinery, walls covered in unfamiliar markings, and odd, twisted furniture that seemed to have been designed for beings with no human form. There was a stillness to the place, as if time had frozen. As if nothing had moved here in centuries. Eli's attention was drawn to a stasis chamber at the far end of the hallway. It was the only thing that seemed undisturbed, as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. He approached slowly, his breath catching in his throat. The chamber was transparent, and inside lay a figure humanoid, but distinctly alien. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent gray, with delicate features that reminded him of a forgotten dream. The being's long, flowing hair seemed to move even though there was no air in the chamber. For a moment, Eli thought it was a trick of the light. But then, he saw it, the alien's eyes wide open, staring directly at him. A chill ran down Eli's spine. He reached out, trembling, to touch the glass. Without thinking, he whispered the first thing that came to his mind, the words slipping out as if they were familiar, though he had never spoken them before. "Veil Thari," he said. The reaction was instant. The alien's eyes widened even more, if that was possible, and its body stiffened as though frozen in place. Eli stepped back, startled by the sudden shift. The being didn't move, but something had changed. Something had triggered in the air between them. His crew gathered around him, murmurs of confusion breaking the silence. "What did you say?" one of them asked, a young engineer named Sarah. Eli looked back at the frozen figure, his mind racing. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't mean to say anything. It just slipped out." But the alien's stillness only deepened, and something more unsettling was beginning to settle in Eli's mind. This wasn't just a chance encounter. He had said the name instinctively, but how? The markings on the walls, the strange carvings, they felt familiar now, as if he had seen them somewhere before. A memory, long buried, was trying to claw its way to the surface. He shook his head. It didn't make sense. There was no way he could know this being's name. No way at all. Sarah's voice broke his thoughts. "We need to get this thing back to the ship. We'll figure out what it is later." Eli hesitated. Something in him didn't want to leave, something deep inside him urging him to stay. But his sense of responsibility, the need to get answers, won out. "Right," he said, voice hoarse. "Let's move quickly. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes." As the crew began to prepare the alien for transport, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that they were not the only ones watching. The ship, in all its desolation, seemed to pulse with energy, its empty halls echoing faint whispers. He turned once more to the figure in the stasis chamber, but now he could swear he saw a flicker of something recognition, perhaps in the alien's eyes. He didn't know what he had unleashed by speaking that name. He didn't know why it had caused such a reaction. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just a discovery. This was something far more dangerous, something that would change everything. And somehow, Eli knew that the answer lay not in the alien, but in the name. The name that no one had remembered until now. The halberd hummed with the soft sound of engines running, but inside its cramped hallways, there was only silence. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The strange alien in the stasis chamber, Valthari, was still frozen in place, her translucent skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She hadn't moved, hadn't responded in any other way since he spoke her name. The name he couldn't have possibly known. As they made their way back to the main shuttle, Eli found his thoughts constantly drifting back to that moment. He had felt a strange connection when he spoke her name, as if something deep within the very fabric of space had shifted. But why? And how? It was Sarah who broke his focus. "We need to figure out what's going on here," she said, her voice taut with urgency. "There's something in the air here. This ship, it feels off." Eli nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. The crew had carefully placed Valthari in a containment chamber aboard the halberd, a secure space for any potentially dangerous alien life forms. It was a precaution, though Eli didn't believe she was a threat. She was different. He couldn't explain it, but she wasn't like the hostile alien species they encountered in the galaxy. Her presence was something else entirely. When they arrived back at the halberd's main bridge, Eli began to scan the alien vessel's databanks, hoping to find any clues that might shed light on the origin of the ship. The walls were lined with alien symbols, too complex to decipher in one sitting, but Eli had a feeling he was missing something crucial. The more he stared at the symbols, the more they seemed to shift, like they were alive. His stomach twisted. There was something almost familiar about them. Hours passed as Eli worked in solitude, piecing together fragments of the ship's records. Most of it was corrupted, but there was a pattern. One phrase kept appearing again and again: the memory keepers. It was mentioned alongside warnings about the void and a place called the Null Zone. His fingers hovered over the console as a sense of dread crept up his spine. What did it mean? What was the Null Zone? Why was it so important? Before he could dig deeper, the comm system came to life. It was Sarah again, her voice strained. "Eli, you need to come to the containment chamber. You need to see this." Eli's heart skipped a beat. He quickly gathered his things, rushing through the narrow halls of the ship until he reached the containment room. The air inside felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The doors slid open, and Eli stepped in. There she was, Valthari, standing now. Her figure was still as delicate as before, but she was moving. Slowly. Her eyes flickered to Eli as if she had just woken from a long slumber. The crew had kept their distance, watching her with a mixture of fear and fascination. Eli's breath caught in his throat as her gaze settled on him, her eyes locking with his. He almost felt seen in a way he couldn't describe. It was like she was searching through him, through his very soul, as if she could see the things he had buried deep inside. And then she spoke. Not in broken sentences, not with difficulty, but with clarity. "You are the one who remembers." Eli blinked, stunned. Her voice was soft, like the sound of wind passing through ancient trees, but the words rang with a depth that made his heart race. "I remember," he stammered. Valthari nodded slowly. Her fingers brushed against the containment glass, as if she were tracing the outline of something invisible. "You spoke my name. No one has remembered it in eons. You have awakened something within me." Eli felt a knot form in his stomach. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "How could I possibly know your name?" Valthari's gaze became distant, her eyes growing clouded, as if lost in a memory she couldn't fully access. "It is not just a name. It is a key. A key to what remains of my people." The memory keepers. They entrusted their legacy to those who could remember. But it has been forgotten for so long. Her voice faltered, and she looked down as though ashamed. I failed them. Eli took a step forward, confusion swirling in his mind. You failed? Who? She met his gaze once more, her eyes filled with ancient sadness. My kind. We were once many, but we are now no more. Our memories were our power. Our very existence was tied to our names. But when the great forgetting began, we could no longer hold on. My people. We were forgotten by the universe. The room grew colder, the air thick with the weight of her words. Eli stood motionless, trying to comprehend what she was telling him. The great forgetting? He repeated. Faelthari's voice grew quieter. It is what happens when identity fades. It is what happens when no one remembers you. The Unmaker comes. It devours memories. It destroys worlds. It leaves nothing but emptiness. Eli's blood ran cold. He had heard stories of cosmic entities, creatures that existed beyond the understanding of most civilizations. But nothing like this. The Unmaker sounded like something out of myth, something too terrifying to be real. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the ship, snapping Eli from his thoughts. We're not alone, Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom. The signal. It's coming back. And it's not just a beacon anymore. It's alive. Eli's heart pounded as he turned to Faelthari, who seemed more agitated now, her eyes wide with fear. They know you're here. The Unmaker is already awake. Eli stared at her, panic surging through him. He didn't know what to do, how to stop whatever was coming. But one thing was clear. Their discovery had just triggered something far darker, far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And whatever it was coming for them. The halberd shook violently as the alarms continued to blare, the sound reverberating through the walls like a warning. Eli's heart raced, his mind spinning with the revelation that the Unmaker, some kind of ancient force that consumed memory itself, was now aware of their presence. He couldn't understand how or why this was happening, but the cold sense of impending doom gripped him. It was as if the very fabric of reality was starting to fray. Sarah's voice crackled through the comms again. We're not alone, Eli. There's something in the dark space beyond us, something moving fast. The urgency in her tone sent a chill down his spine. The crew was already scrambling to secure the ship, preparing for whatever was coming. Faelthari stood in the containment chamber, her face pale and tight with fear. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic. It is here, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone in particular. The Unmaker is here, and it is drawn to the name. My name. Eli's throat tightened. He had a horrible, sinking feeling that everything was connected. Faelthari's name, the alien ship, the strange symbols on the walls, and now the Unmaker. It was all linked. But how? Faelthari, Eli said, his voice almost trembling. What do you mean? What is this thing, the Unmaker? And why is it after you? Her gaze flickered toward him, the desperation in her eyes almost palpable. My people. We are no longer truly alive. Our minds are stored in the stars, in fragments, waiting to be remembered. But the Unmaker. It was born from the void, a place where memory ceases to exist. It is a creature that feeds on identity, that erases history from existence. It devours us, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but the darkness. Eli's mind spun as he tried to make sense of her words. A creature born from the void? Was it some sort of entity, or was the Unmaker simply a force, an overwhelming void that consumed knowledge and memory? Before he could ask more, a loud thud echoed through the ship's hull, followed by the harsh crackling of the comms. Eli, we're not going to make it, Sarah shouted, her voice filled with panic. There's something out there. It's not a ship, it's something. Alive. The screen before him flickered to life, showing static images of the ship's exterior. Eli's stomach dropped as he saw it. A massive, writhing mass of black tendrils, like a living shadow, extending outward from the dark space beyond. The tendrils seemed to pulse with some unnatural rhythm, as though they were alive, reaching toward them, pulling toward the halberd. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a creature. It was something worse. A vast, all-consuming presence that had been waiting for them. "It's coming for us," Eli muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But why? Why now? The ship shuddered again, this time with more force, and the lights flickered overhead. The mass of black tendrils outside moved faster, closing in on them with terrifying speed. Veilthari stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with sorrow. "It follows the name. It knows I am here. It knows that I have been remembered. And it wants to take that away." Eli's heart pounded. The Unmaker was a force of annihilation, not just of bodies, but of existence itself. The ship, the alien, even the memories of Veilthari's people. All of it was at risk of being erased forever. "We have to stop it," Eli said, his voice shaking. "We need to find a way to fight back." Veilthari shook her head, her long, dark hair flowing around her like a halo. "You cannot fight what has no form, what is not bound by time. It will take everything you know, everything you remember." Eli stared at her in disbelief. "There has to be something we can do. We can't just let it destroy us." She was silent for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the ship's console, where symbols and warnings flashed on the screen. Then she spoke again, her voice quiet but filled with purpose. "There is one thing. A place. The Null Zone. That is where the Unmaker was born. The only way to stop it is to reach the heart of that place and to unmake it before it can unmake us. It's the only way to sever its hold." Eli's stomach twisted. The Null Zone was the location from the strange star map Veilthari had shown him earlier, but he hadn't realized what it truly meant. The Null Zone wasn't just a place. It was the origin of the Unmaker. "If we go there, we might be able to end it," Eli asked, hope flickering in his chest. Veilthari's eyes softened, but her expression was grim. "Not end it. But if we can destroy the core of the Unmaker, we can sever its influence. It will no longer be able to reach this plane of existence. But it will not be easy. The Null Zone is a place beyond the grasp of time, a place where memory is not allowed." Eli turned to Sarah, whose face was pale but determined. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. Veilthari's gaze drifted to the mass of black tendrils now surrounding the halberd like a dark cocoon. "Not long. We have only moments before it begins to erase us." Eli clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had no choice now. The halberd had to reach the Null Zone. It was the only hope they had. He turned back to the console, quickly inputting the coordinates for the distant location. ASAI the ship shuddered again. The screens flickered one last time, showing the dark mass closing in on them. The tendrils reached out, pressing against the hull, seeming to sense their every movement. "We're running out of time," Eli said, his voice steady despite the terror rising within him. "Hold on tight. We're going to the Null Zone." The halberd roared to life, engines pushing forward as the crew braced for the journey ahead. The black tendrils followed, but they were still too far behind. They had a chance. But as the ship lurched forward into the dark unknown, Eli couldn't help but feel that they were heading into something far worse than they had anticipated, a place where the very idea of existence could be unmade. The halberd moved through the vast expanse of space, its engines roaring as they pushed against the overwhelming darkness that surrounded them. Every inch of the ship felt as though it was pulling them deeper into the unknown, into the heart of the universe's most terrifying mystery. Eli stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the rapidly approaching coordinates, trying to ignore the ever-growing sense of dread that pressed against his chest. The tendrils were still out there, swirling in the space behind them, an ominous reminder that the Unmaker was close, closing in with relentless determination. He could feel it, an absence, an emptiness in the very fabric of reality, as though the universe itself was starting to unravel around them. "Status report," Eli barked, his voice sharp, more to steady his nerves than to give an order. Sarah was at the helm, her hands flying over the controls. "We're moving as fast as we can." But the closer we get to the null zone, the more unstable space becomes. The fabric of reality is thinner here. We can't jump to hyperspace, and our comms are dead. Eli nodded grimly, his mind racing. The null zone was a place where even time itself bent and twisted, a place where memory and identity were nothing more than fragile concepts. A place that, as Valthari had said, was not just dangerous, but fundamentally wrong. We need to stay focused. Get us as close as possible. We don't have much time. Valthari stood at the back of the bridge, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the view screen. She had been quiet since their departure, her anxiety palpable. The closer they got to the null zone, the more she seemed to retreat into herself, as though she were fighting something that only she could see. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached up to touch the alien symbols etched into the wall beside her. "I warned you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "The null zone is not just a place. It is a threshold, a barrier between worlds, between memories, and nothingness." Eli's heart skipped a beat. He turned to face her. "What do you mean by that? Can we make it through?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "To pass through, you must leave behind everything you know. You must forget who you are, even for a moment. The Unmaker is bound to the void. It knows you, your memories, your identity. It feeds on what it can erase. The closer you get to the center, the more it will try to pull you apart." Eli's jaw clenched. "So you're saying that if we don't forget who we are, it'll destroy us?" Valthari nodded solemnly. "Exactly. The Unmaker has no form, no shape. It is a force of nothingness. It is fed by what you remember. And the closer you get to its heart, the harder it will be to hold on to who you are." Eli's pulse quickened. The thought of losing himself, of losing everything that made him who he was unbearable. But what choice did they have? The Unmaker was already erasing their world. There was no other way. The ship groaned as it passed through the last veil of darkness, and suddenly everything changed. The stars outside the windows disappeared. It wasn't just the lack of light, it was as if they had crossed into a different reality entirely. The void around them was not empty, but full of something terrible, something alive. The air seemed to shimmer, and the fabric of space itself felt thinner, like it could tear at any moment. "We've entered the null zone," Sarah said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "This is it." Eli felt his heart race. The atmosphere on the bridge was oppressive, as though the walls were closing in. The ship shuddered once more, and then the real terror began. The walls of the halberd began to distort. The symbols on the walls, the ones that had once seemed like intricate carvings, began to move, shifting and changing with an eerie fluidity, as if they were alive. It wasn't just the ship's systems malfunctioning, the halberd itself seemed to be unraveling in the same way the rest of space was. "Brace yourselves!" Eli shouted, reaching for the control panel as the ship lurched violently. The comms crackled again, but this time, it wasn't Sarah's voice that came through. It was something else. A low, guttural sound that vibrated through the ship, sending a tremor through Eli's bones. It wasn't language, it was feeling. A deep, cold sense of loss, of erasure. "It's trying to reach us," Valthari whispered, her voice trembling. "It's feeding on us. Our memories. It wants us to forget." Eli's mind swirled, his thoughts becoming fragmented, as if something was clawing at the edges of his consciousness. He had to hold on. He had to remember who he was. "Stay focused," he shouted, but his voice sounded strange in his ears, distant. His hands were shaking as he gripped the console. Then he heard it. The faintest whisper, barely audible but unmistakably clear. "Eli." He froze. His name. But the voice wasn't his own. It was soft, almost melodic, and it sounded familiar. A face flashed through his mind, a face he had long forgotten. A woman's face, smiling at him with a look of deep love and longing. "Eli," the voice whispered again, and with it came a wave of disorienting memories. Flashes of a life he had never lived, moments he had never experienced. His mind reeled as if he were seeing someone else's life, someone else's past. The feeling was overwhelming, suffocating. Eli? Sarah's voice cut through the fog in his mind. We need to keep going. We can't stop here. It's trying to pull us in. Eli shook his head, his hands clutching the controls tightly. I'm fine. Just keep us moving. But the memories kept coming. Faces, voices, names. His head throbbed with the pressure of all the things he was beginning to forget. A sudden wave of grief washed over him, so intense he thought it might swallow him whole. He was losing himself, losing his very identity. Stay with me, Eli, Sarah urged again. We're almost there. Eli blinked, shaking his head, trying to clear the fog. He had to remember who he was. He had to hold on. Then, just as the weight of the memories was about to overwhelm him, the ship lurched again, this time more violently. The null zone was growing closer, and with it, the final threshold between existence and oblivion. We're not going to make it, Eli whispered to himself, more to the dark void around him than anyone else. But even as he said it, a part of him knew that they had no choice but to push forward. There was no turning back. And with that, the halberd plunged deeper into the center of the null zone, the last hope of stopping the Unmaker slipping away with each passing moment. The halberd shook violently, the ship groaning under the pressure of the null zone's unimaginable force. The very air inside the ship seemed to warp and distort, like a nightmare made real. The walls flickered in and out of focus, the once solid structure now feeling as fragile as paper. Eli gripped the control panel, fighting to hold onto his sanity as the flood of alien memories threatened to overwhelm him again. His mind felt stretched, fragile, as though it might snap at any moment. We can't hold on much longer. Sarah's voice cracked over the comms. We're almost at the center. The ship's systems are failing. Eli swallowed, his pulse racing. He could feel it. The Unmaker. It was close now, a living shadow stretching across everything. It was waiting, patient, and hungry. We have to get to the core of the null zone. That's where it all began. Valthari, standing at the back of the bridge, looked almost serene in her despair. Her face was pale, her body trembling, but her eyes were fixed on something only she could see. She had grown quiet, as if in a trance. Eli turned to her, desperation creeping into his voice. Valthari, help us. What do we need to do? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant, as though she were looking beyond the walls of the ship, beyond the veil of reality itself. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. To undo it, we must remember what it is trying to erase. The Unmaker feeds on forgetting. It erases the essence of who we are. But if you can truly remember who you are, it can't take you. It can't take anything. Eli's breath caught in his throat. You're telling me to fight it with memories? Not just memories. Valthari's voice was steady, but it carried a deep weight, a knowledge that only someone who had lived through eons of suffering could possess. You must fight with the truth of what you are. Not just the memories of your life, but the essence of what makes you the truth beneath the layers of time, beneath the shifting of the stars. The Unmaker can't erase that. It is beyond its power. Eli's mind raced. He had no idea how he could possibly hold on to such a thing, how he could tap into something so primal. But in that moment, as the tendrils of the Unmaker reached closer, his will hardened. He couldn't let it consume him. He wouldn't let it consume anyone. Everyone, hold on! Eli shouted to the crew. We can do this. We can stop it. Sarah's hands trembled over the controls, her voice strained. We're almost there. The core is just ahead. But it's alive. It's pulsing. I don't know how much longer we can keep the ship intact. The Unmaker was pulling at the ship now, tendrils snaking into the very hull, pulling them toward the center of the null zone. Space itself bent and twisted, creating fractures in the very fabric of reality. In the view screen, Eli could see the heart of the Unmaker, a swirling mass of darkness, a singularity that seemed to devour everything around it. This is it, Eli whispered to himself, his hand gripping the console so tightly his knuckles turned white. The Unmaker was close. Too close. He could hear it now, in the back of his mind, its whispering voice seeping into his thoughts like a poison. It was calling to him, trying to erase his memories, to make him forget who he was. His name, his past, his crew, everything. The sensation was overwhelming, cold fingers of despair creeping into his mind. But then he thought of Sarah. He thought of the life he had fought for, the people he loved, the things that made him him. His memories weren't just fragments of his past. They were his strength. They were his purpose. He closed his eyes, focusing on that single, undeniable truth that he was Eli. Not just a man aboard a ship, but a person who had lived, loved, fought, and survived. His past, his choices, his regrets, and his victories. They were part of him, and they always would be. And then it clicked. He opened his eyes, looking directly at the core of the Unmaker, which now pulsed with an almost sentient hunger. His heart pounded in his chest, but his voice was steady as he spoke. I remember who I am. I remember everything. Veilthari turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and terror. You must hold on to it, she whispered. All of it. The Unmaker is nothing without your memories. Eli took a deep breath and reached out with his mind, connecting to the ship's systems, pushing past the veil of fear and confusion. As he did, a torrent of memories flooded back faces, places, experiences, and they all coalesced into one singular truth. He was alive, and that was enough. The ship shuddered violently, the Unmaker's tendrils now fully inside, trying to tear the very ship apart. But Eli held on to his identity with everything he had. His crew. His mission. His name. I won't let you take me, he growled. Suddenly, the ship lurched forward, pulling through the dark veil toward the center of the Unmaker's heart. And in that instant, Eli did the unthinkable. He remembered everything. The halberd broke through the center of the Unmaker, its systems going dark for a brief moment before a brilliant light, pure and blinding, exploded from the core of the ship. Eli could feel it, a pulse that resonated through his very being. It wasn't just a light, it was a memory, a moment of clarity, an undying truth. The Unmaker's influence shattered. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. The air inside the ship grew still, the oppressive weight that had been pressing on them lifting. We did it, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. Eli stood still, breathing heavily, his mind spinning from the experience. He looked at the view screen. The heart of the Null Zone was gone, destroyed by the force of his defiance, by the strength of his memories, his identity. The crew was alive. The ship was intact. But as the halberd began to stabilize, Eli's mind still buzzed with one final thought. The Unmaker had been stopped, but the Null Zone was not gone. It was still out there, waiting. And though they had won this battle, the war was far from over. He turned to his crew, his voice steady and resolute. We're not finished yet. There's more to this, but we'll face it together. And as the ship moved away from the center of the Null Zone, toward the unknown, Eli knew one thing for certain: the Unmaker had failed. And as long as they held on to who they were, nothing, not even the darkest corners of the universe, could take that away.